What's up, world? I need to repair a puncture on a tire, so I thought I would share the process with you that I use to mount and dismount tires on my tire changing machine. The tire that we're going to use here is a Pirelli 21-inch tire, and it is actually off of our 2018 Ford Edge, and it actually had a screw in between the treads. Now, 100% transparency, I'm definitely not a professional tire tech, so if you have any tips or tricks, I'm all ears. The advantage that I have when I actually bought this tire changing machine was a buddy of mine, Patrick. I have to give a shout out to Patrick, that was actually a professional tire tech before we started working together, actually helped me learn how to operate this tire machine. So Patrick and Clayton, I owe you a big thank you for actually helping me learn how to use this tire machine. And I've helped out a lot of buddies, a lot of friends, a lot of family, and I get to use it myself on all my own stuff because tire shops are absolutely frustrating to me. So, really quick, I don't know if any of these names are actually like official names. It's just what we've always called around the shop. So I wanted to walk through some of the components that the tire machine, has on it, and also share with you just what some of the names are. So as we're going through the process, you won't be wondering what I'm talking about. So we'll walk through that real quick. A few of the components of the tire machine is obviously we need a good air supply, and the air compressor is actually mounted outside of the building, so we don't have to listen to it run all the time. From our air supply, it actually goes through a dryer filter. Then from the dryer filter, it actually goes through a lubrication tank that holds a small canister of oil. This we normally refer to as the swing arm, and this component is actually that we refer to as the duck head. The shape of it, you can probably tell why it's called a duck head. This arm is called the bead breaker, so we use that to actually remove the tire bead, get it loose from the wheel. This we actually call the turntable. I don't know if that's correct or not. It's just what we've always called it. These are the wheel clamps, and we actually have some hard plastic or polymer pads on there so that we don't damage aluminum wheels. Over here we have an assist arm, which is extremely useful with low profile tires, and it is actually air operated from our air supply. And down below are all of our control pedals. Depending on the tire machine application, some of them may have 2 pedals, some of them may have 3. This actually has 4, depends on how complex. The pedal on the far left actually controls an air hose up here and has a gauge on it. And so whenever you get the tire mounted up, you can actually just pull that air hose over and you press this pedal, get air to go on the tire. If you depress it all the way, you actually get air out of the turntable and the clamps to put air in the backside of the tire so that you can set the bead on the tire. Next pedal over is the clamps. So if you hold it all the way up, the clamps open, all the way down, they lock, and in the middle, they're in place. The pedal over to the right to that one is the bead breaker. So that controls this arm and has a hydraulic cylinder or an air cylinder. And so you can press that pedal and actually moves that air cylinder to break the bead. And the pedal all the way to the far right is actually the turntable. So if you push it down, it rotates clockwise, and up, counterclockwise. That's the basic functions of it. So it's getting late, so let's get started on this tire. All right, so first step in the process is I actually identified where the leak was. And I just used a cheap piece of chalk, made a mark here on the sidewall, and put a circle around it on the tread. And then on the valve stem, just remove the cap. And I've had this tool forever and a day, I think. It's just a valve stem removal tool. These are pretty cheap. I'll actually put a link down in the description below for a good one. And just put that inside of the valve stem, turn left, and that will remove your valve port. And we're going to let all the air out of it. All right, obviously this video is for entertainment purposes only, so I'm definitely not an instructor, and again, I'm not a professional tire tech. But I do want to say right up front that if you're using this for any kind of information, for maybe if you've, trying to change your own tires, if you bought a tire machine, anything like that, there is a bit of physicality with this. Now, obviously, you don't need to go out to be, top 5 in the CrossFit games or anything like that. But, if you have any kind of back issues, shoulder rotator issues, elbow issues, don't exacerbate any injuries, trying to lift this. I mean, it is a mounted tire and wheel, and although it's not overly heavy, if you have any pre-existing injuries, you definitely don't want to compound that issue. So ask somebody to help you if you need to lift it on, lift it off the turntable, whatever you may need going on. So I just want to throw that out there. That way, don't get hurt doing this because, like I say, it is a mounted tire and wheel, and it can get heavy at times. Now that we've got all the air out of the tire, the next step is we are actually going to use the bead breaker to break the bead. Sometimes we refer to it as a bead, sometimes it's a lip, but we want to basically get this that's stuck onto the side of the wheel or the outside edge of the wheel. We want to get that loose and get those edges as close to the middle of the wheel as possible. As you can see, there's a fairly large gap between the wheel and the tire here. So our next step is we're actually going to open up the clamps on the turntable and press the pedal for that. After the pedal comes all the way up, we get enough space to set the wheel up. And again, this is where the physical part comes in. Sometimes I can grab it by the side or I can grab it by the spokes, whatever works for you. Sometimes you can actually get it right here on the base of the wheel. Whatever works for you, you know, a comfortable position. Just absolutely don't hurt yourself doing this. Once I get the tire up on the turntable, what I like to do is be able to look under here and make sure that the clamps have a good grip on the wheel. And then normally I can take it and just kind of set in a kneeling position. Work those clamps in. And then put a little pressure down. And I'll hold on to it, no problem. So that's kind of my normal procedure with this. Once the wheel's actually clamped down on the turntable, what I normally like to do is rotate it. And what I want to do is get the valve stem just to the opposite side of the duck head. So I'm going to come on around with it. And that's going to help us keep from breaking that TPMS monitor that I was talking about. Since we kind of avoided the tire pressure monitor system and the valve stem with the big bead breaker, this is where the assist arm really comes in, because we can kind of come over here by it. And we can be very careful. And make sure that that bead is all the way limited. Without that arm, this is extremely difficult to do, so that is absolutely pays for itself in the long run. Once everything is clamped down, you're comfortable with the position of everything. How the swing arm actually positions itself is it has a threaded thumb knob, and basically what you want to do is put the duck head all the way down against the wheel. Then you're going to run the screw all the way out, and then this actually has a mechanism built into it that when you put the throw lever up, this throw lever that locks that arm in a position, it will be just off of the wheel. So you don't have to worry about it damaging the wheel. So that's basically how this works. Now that we have all of that position, we're going to go ahead and get some lubrication on this tire so it'll slide off easy. One of the tricks that my buddies Patrick and Clayton and I have learned over the years to protect some really high-end wheels is something that's pretty inexpensive, and it just gives you an extra layer of protection. I'm not overly concerned about these wheels by any stretch of the imagination. And there are some really high-end tire machines out there that you probably wouldn't have to do this with, but I know this is just an offshore, not very expensive tire machine. My little shop out behind my house, it just doesn't make sense to spend $18,000 or $20,000 on a tire machine. So one of the tricks that we've learned is just cheap blue painter's tape. And what we'll do is actually just put a ring of painter's tape around the very edge of the wheel and let it stick. And that way, whenever we get the duck head up against it and we pry the bar over, we can make sure that we're not damaging the wheels. If we know the tape is getting scratched up, to back off, regroup, and that way we don't mess up any expensive wheels. And if it's just an old steel trailer wheel or something like that, it really doesn't matter. This is something that we kind of consider whenever we're working on our expensive wheels. One of the things that you're definitely going to need for this job is the actual tire lubrication, and soap and water is okay at best. It evaporates really fast, and it definitely doesn't work as good as a real tire lubricant. I'll put a link down in the description below to this particular tire lubricant, and it lasts a very long time in a small shop. But what I use for this application is just cheap paper cups. These are actually some paper cups left over from a wedding party that my wife went to, and just a cheap paintbrush. So all this stuff, you know, you can get pretty well online or at any big box hardware store, any department store, anything like that. So I just like to pour a little bit of the lubricant inside of the cup and use a paintbrush to paint it on. And it doesn't take a lot of it. You just want to make sure that you have enough lubrication, that you're not, gouging into the tire, messing up a finish. Absolutely want to be careful that whenever you're doing this, that there's enough lubrication that you don't tear the bead of the tire. Okay, so once the tire is actually positioned up over the front side of the duck head, and it'll kind of ride up halfway on this back piece back here. That's actually a little more for mounting, but it's fine. What I like to do is take the assist arm and kind of push down a little bit on the opposite side. And what that's going to do is going to let that tire move up in the center of the wheel on this far side, and let this side over here closest to you, it'll actually let that come up. That way it'll come off. Normally I like to stop before I get to the valve stem or the tire pressure monitoring sensor before it gets to the duck head, because the last thing you want to do is to actually catch this piece on the back side of the duck head on that tire pressure monitoring sensor and damage it. Once we're in this position, again, it's going to take a little bit of physicality. All I have to do is just kind of reach down the bottom side of it, pick it up, start working its way up. Granted, these are low profile tires and they can be extremely tough. They're not the end of the world, just take your time with it. If you have something like a pickup truck tire with a taller sidewall, it's going to be much easier than this. All right, so we're going to take the swing arm and the duck head up out of the way. We're going to come around with the valve stem and the TPMS. And once we're in that position, we're going to put it back down. And now the idea is we need to get this picked up and get the pry bar back for this backside, the backside of the tire. And this again is where the assist arm comes in. I normally like to do here is I take the disc, come under the tire, and I kind of support the weight like that about halfway up, and that allows me to get the pry bar down in this side over here closer to the swing arm and to elevate the tire and get over the duck head. There is a little bit of finesse in this. And we're completely dismounted. So at this point, obviously your swing arm's in the way, so I just like to release the throw lever, swing out of the way, and have it tight. And as you can see, we kind of firmed up our tape. We had pretty good protection on the wheels. Now that we are getting ready to mount the tire back up, one of the things you're going to want to pay attention to, some tires are directional and it will actually be marked on the sidewall. These tires are not, but I am going to put the inside back to the inside and the outside to the outside. First thing that I like to do whenever I'm getting ready is obviously the tire lubrication that we spoke about earlier. I just take a little bit on the brush and just go ahead and get the bead or the lip of that tire, just a thin coat on it. And we were ready to lift it back up on the wheel. So a lot of times whenever we put these tires on, I'm going to rotate this real quick. Again, getting away from that TPMS sensor. A lot of times whenever we put the tires on, sometimes you do have to use the duck head. It can be a challenge, but sometimes you can actually just take this and kind of start working it around and it will fall on like that. So that's about as simple as that side gets. Once we're back down, again, paying attention to our TPMS sensor, get it rotated away from the duck head, and then go ahead and lube up the outside bead of the tire. Now the position of the duck head when we're here is basically just the opposite as whenever it went on. So we're going to lock it into place. Once in this position, what we're going to want to do is get the tire under this notch of the duck head and above this piece, and that will force it down the wheel. So it needs to be in about that position. And again, this is where the assist arm really comes into play. So we got the tire seat on there. We are actually going to go ahead and loosen the clamps or the jaws. Go all the way up with the pedal, halfway down stop, and we'll go all the way back in. Once we have this kind of thing up here free, we can either open the jaws and hold the wheel in place. With this being a low profile, I'm not too concerned about that. But what that would prevent is if the tire popped, meaning if the bead seated against the wheel really hard, it would keep it from popping up at you or bouncing up at you. Could potentially cause injury, so you want to be real careful for that. At this point, we can grab our hose and go ahead and put a little air in it. We'll go ahead and get the bead on the wheel and tire seated back up. Gonna hold it and kind of keep a hand on it. And one more corner right over there. And we're there. Okay, so we can kind of leave in this position and go ahead and grab our valve stem. Once we have our valve stem and our valve stem tool, when we pull this off, air is obviously going to come out because there's nothing holding in. So just definitely don't put your eyes or your face or anything over that, because sometimes this air coming out can freeze and cause small ice particles to come out, or if there's any dust or debris left in there. You definitely don't want that hitting you in the face. So off. And our valve pull goes back into the valve stem. And we're just going to get that snug. And we're going to get the tire up to 35 pounds. And we do have a gauge up here. And so when we let off, you'll see the gauge bounce. That'll level out as we put air in. Again, we can let off. Every time we let off, it'll reset the gauge and we can tell how much air we have in it. If we needed to let any air out to adjust, we actually have a button. We can let a little air out of it. This is probably complete overkill, but I actually like to use a handheld gauge. I can get a little better look at where I'm at, and as you can see, we are over 35 psi, so I'm a little bit of air out of it. What I like about this gauge is I can actually see the pressure as it's going out. So drop pressure, and as you can see, we're about 35 psi. I'm gonna try to snake this around so you can see it. So we're actually about 36, so that's where we're gonna stay. Last step to complete this process is put our valve cap back on. And I just keep a little cheap spray bottle. It just has a mixture of just tap water and a few drops of dish soap in it. And that's usually what I'll check for leaks and stuff like that with. And no leaks. So we are good to go.